Welcome to the Church Planners Toolbox podcast. This is officially our first episode that we're launching this podcast. My name is Justin Neal, a up-and-coming church planner into the city of Detroit. And this is my sending church pastor, Pastor Josh Levesque.
I'm excited to do this. This is basically part of the Great Lakes Baptist School of Church Planting, and we've been promoting church planting and working with lots of church planters. And so this podcast is something we have talked about a lot and have had a lot of people say, do it. We want it. We need it. We want to do it. And so I'm excited we finally get started.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And it's good for me because I get to learn about church planting. I mean, we're studying for this podcast and everything, but through the process of developing this podcast, I get to learn everything that we talk about in our podcast. And this is a good way for other church planners to see our conversations and learn answers to questions that they have about church planting themselves.
Yeah, and so we're excited for this. Not entirely sure what the total life of this is going to be, but we do have a good plan. We want to take at least the next year we have sketched out to walk through step by step a church planting timeline. And so this is something that is based on my own personal experience. We've been church planting here in the city of Dearborn, now coming in our 5th year of the church plant. And so we've got to experience that whole process of going from vision all the way up to launch, but then even that kind of establishing phase we're still in of church planting. And I have had other church planters and pastors at times tell me hey, write these things down, write down these memories and these things so you don't forget them. And so I'm also excited to do this, kind of look back over what that process has been for us, while hopefully some of it's still fresh enough to remember.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited for today's first episode. For all of these episodes, we're going to be going through the church planning timeline. That is essentially your thought and your prayers and working with. Correct me if I'm wrong, essentially a 2-year timeline and the different stages and processes you'll go through up to the launch of your church plant.
Yes. So the church planting timeline that we're going to be looking at is, like you said, it's a 2-year timeline, and it really goes up until that moment of launch. And when we use the word launch, what I refer to is the start of public worship. The start of that Sunday public worship service, where from that point on, you're intending to be regularly meeting and worshiping. So there's a whole lot that can come before that. And so we've tried to kind of outline that in the sense of somebody who has a heart or a burden for church planting and just doesn't quite know what the next step is. Hopefully this can help. But if you're anywhere in that timeline of pre-launch, hopefully this will be a timely thing for you. You can jump in with us and learn and some of these things. But I hope as well that this might be helpful to pastors who are wanting to launch a church plant to kind of see what the process looks like. Because that's the cool dynamic that we have now is that's where we are as a church plant, getting ready to launch our first church planter out of Dearborn into Detroit. And so we will get to kind of review some of the things that we did, but we're also going to be, while we're recording this podcast, we're going to be going through these steps again ourselves to launch another church plant. So these are conversations that we probably would have had anyways, between pastor and planter.
Sure. Yeah. And
so we thought, why not do it in this format where we can, preserve and hopefully share some of these things that'll be helpful. I also want to say that it's not just going to be our voices either.
Sure, yeah,
I'm looking forward to getting some other seasoned, experienced church planters. We have a lot that we've been working with that I will want to bring in on certain episodes and topics that can offer another angle or another perspective. If you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in church planting, it helps to kind of know maybe the context or the background that we're coming at it. Because I remember as a church planter, I love podcasts, and if I want to learn something, I tend to look for a podcast on it, and there are some church plant podcasts out there, but there was not a lot out there that was kind of the same context as me. So for that, we are independent Baptists. And so the things that we share are going to be Baptist in doctrine and kind of a result of our church planting context. But not to say that these things won't be helpful to anybody. If you're just looking to learn, there's some very practical things. But if you are a Baptist church planter, hopefully it can be even more precise or more helpful to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, like you're saying, the process that we go through, we're sharing with you guys, and we're just excited to see where these next couple years takes us, what the Lord does with it. For this first episode, there's several parts to this first stage of church planning, and I have here in this specific group in selecting a city, where we can work off each other's ideas about selecting a city. So Pastor Josh, in terms of selecting a city, what are kind of the fundamental categories you're looking for in selecting a city?
Yeah, this is one of the topics that I've probably done the most thought on and actually written some things out. And so maybe we'll be able to share some of those things. But when it comes to where to plant, now we're assuming if you're looking at this podcast, you already have some level of calling on your life. Maybe we'll talk about that specifically someday, but you've already felt a burden maybe to plant a church. And so we're not having to establish necessarily the need for church planting. You understand that and want to participate in it. But then the first question that a church planter does have to ask is where? Where's my place? Where's my city? And when we're asking that, how do we define the need of a city? Because we talk about need. And so that's something that I've tried to bring maybe some definition to, is that idea of need, and how do we both spiritually and strategically determine the need for a new church in a city.
Well, that's awesome. So what kind of areas are you looking for when you're seeing a spiritual need of a city?
I think the first thing that we have to start with when we're talking about need is the presence of other churches. When we're doing church planting, it ought to be the desire to go to the place where there is a high need. And I'm going to keep using that word, but understand the context. Where there is a high need, in other words, there aren't a lot of churches. When Jesus described need, he said to get your eyes up, look at the harvest. So the harvest is the field where we want to work, where we're going to go fulfill the Great Commission, because he says that the harvest is great, laborers are few. And so we want to find where the laborers are few or none, and go there and work in that harvest, and have that, pioneering spirit, like the Apostle Paul. He didn't want to build on another man's foundation. He wanted to go where there was no church, was no gospel. And amazingly, anymore, even the United States of America, there are cities, even whole counties in the U.S. That are mission fields. That maybe they had gospel witness in the past and it's left or declined, but for whatever reason, or just the population's grown so much that there are areas all over the U.S. that are in need of new churches because the current gospel witness there is not meeting the demand of the population.
No, that's really good. As I've been researching Detroit and looking at specifically the need of Detroit, I noticed that there are a population of churches there. And on surface glance, it seems that there are a number of churches that may be able to share the gospel. But what I've found is a lot of these churches aren't truly standing for the biblical gospel and what we need in those. So in terms of, as you're looking at a city and you're articulating, types of churches that may be in the area, how do you navigate through something like that?
Yeah, so we can start to just look at the surface, and I've written about trying to calculate things like a church to population ratio, like how many churches to people, but you don't just need to be able to quantify or count the number of churches, but you have to also do a little bit of work to qualify those churches and say, just because there are churches doesn't mean there's not a need for a new church. And that could be for a number of reasons. If you just look at any city and just Google church, arrows or dots are going to pop up on the map because there are lots of things that are called church, but you don't have to work very hard to start looking closely at that and examining it. And you'll find out, first of all, a lot of those churches just don't even exist.
Yeah.
They're,
I've noticed
they're,
that, yeah.
they've closed, they've left, or they've, sadly dwindled down to a level where they're not really an active presence or an active witness
Yep.
in their city. And so just the presence of some churches doesn't mean there isn't a need. But then really the ultimate factor of determining is know who you are as a church planter, know your doctrine, and then know is there a church of like faith in the area. And when we're looking at, are they preaching the gospel? Not just is the gospel present like in their doctrinal statement, but is it a church that is actually reaching the population with the gospel? Because I've looked and seen sometimes there may be a faithful gospel church, saved people, genuine people, maybe even a Baptist church. But they're not really active in evangelism. They're not really reaching the city. So church planting should always have the goal of reaching people with the gospel.
Absolutely.
And so if there's an area where that's not happening, then perhaps there is a need for a new church.
Yeah, I think the temptation can be sometimes when, at least this is what I kind of navigated through when I was looking at other churches. I didn't want to be judgmental of other churches. I didn't want to look at a church and say, oh, you're not, this just because you're not in our circle. But if we look at it principally, just based on the principles of Scripture, that church is not fulfilling the Great Commission. And we have to navigate through that, and we have to sift through that, because it's even more of a hindrance if you have someone who's posing themselves as a operating church, and then that just brings confusion of whether a church needs to be there or not. And so that I really appreciate your answers there.
Yeah, and then also, consider population. That's one of the first things. So that church population ratio. Consider, things like the potential reach of the churches. Like maybe there is a church, but what's their capacity, and compared to the community that they're in, and is there necessarily another section of the city? This gets a little more necessary when you're in like an urban environment, and there are almost communities within communities. Perhaps something like just a river or a highway, or the railroad tracks, like you talk about, like just over there, the church isn't effectively reaching beyond there. And so I look at things like drive time, radius, and how far. When we're talking about the reach of a church in the 21st century, I think that's one of the practical things. How far are they evangelizing? It's kind of hard to determine, but you can see how far does somebody have to drive to get there. Yeah, absolutely. As well. And so is there a community that's maybe outside the reach of another good independent Baptist church? Yeah.
And so then to build off that, because specifically in this episode, I think we're surveying regions in particular. So when I was looking at Metro Detroit, which covers a large land mass, there are several places that have needs in Metro Detroit. And I really believe the Lord, pressed in my heart and directed me to plant a church in Detroit. But maybe for someone listening who sees multiple areas of need, how does one navigate as they're praying to the Lord, as they're seeking His will? Navigate through a need here, and need there.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you went that direction, because we can look at this as a strategic, statistical analysis, and I love that side of it because I'm a nerd, and I love looking at maps and studying that way. And when you start doing that work, what you're going to find is there are needs everywhere. There are more needs than you could possibly meet in your lifetime. There's no lack of needs. And there's almost not a bad place to plant a church nowadays, honestly, especially when we're looking at some of our big urban environments. The needs are all around us. You just have to get your eyes up and start looking at them. The Lord's going to show you, but it is primarily a spiritual process of finding where to go. Asking, and we say, pray the Lord of the harvest to send forth laborers into the harvest. And so the Lord is the one who calls and sends. And so this needs to be an operation of the Holy Ghost in guiding somebody there. And I think the first thing that He uses is the visual.
Absolutely.
I always say God's not going to call you to a place you have never heard of or never seen. He uses our eyes affect our heart, and we cannot answer the call until we are aware of the need. And so you got to start looking with eyes of faith, prayerfully asking the Lord, and then the Lord's fully capable of pointing and directing if we are sensitive to it.
Yeah, no, that definitely resonates with me, because as I was first praying about where to plant a church, I was just focusing on the general area. I was just thinking about general things, but I looked at different areas. I looked at different regions that have need, and because I examined the other areas, it gave me the confidence to say, I've done my best to look at other areas. I've done my best to see what other needs are out there.
Yeah.
And despite all the areas that I've looked at, this is the one that's pointing out to me in the downtown Detroit and down that area.
Yeah.
So I think what you just said there, I think, is one of the great principles of searching God's will, is to let your eyes see the different areas.
And then if you have those spiritual eyes, you're going to be drawn. And then there's some spiritual factors to look for too. And the first thing that I say is that what we're looking for is spiritual darkness, right? Because a church is a light, and the gospel is a light. And so we want to be taking it into dark places. And so when we're looking around, we see the darkness around us, and that can be defined by the presence of false religions. We planted a church here in Dearborn, Michigan, which is a majority Muslim city. And that's really what drew us here, was the need. I grew up in Michigan and just started and increasingly became aware of, like, wow, the most Islamic city in the United States is in Michigan, in my home state. And so it was that spiritual need that really started to draw my heart. And then, the Lord had so many ways of kind of confirming that. But also just we see wickedness and we see some of the results of sin. And those are the things that ought to draw us, almost like of the first responder is drawn into the burning building, or drawn towards the cries of help. When we see that, and you start to, your awareness of a need starts to become what we call a burden. A burden.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another word we use, but I like to define words. And so I call a burden a sense of spiritual responsibility that's the result of awareness of a spiritual need. You see a need, but then you start to feel, well, somebody ought to do something about that.
Yeah.
So the first step is somebody ought to plant a church there. And that's what it was in Dearborn for me, is like, somebody ought to plant a church in Dearborn. And you're one step on your way.
Yeah. And I remember you telling me that before, and I think that really helped me a lot, because I was looking at so many different other areas to discern God's calling for my life. I was thinking about, what am I passionate about? Or what do I like to do? And I was looking back on, what kind of experiences have God given me, which all contribute to God's calling. But when you center it on that sense of spiritual responsibility, and God calls people in different ways. God uses different things to call people. But at the end of the day, there has to be a sense of you fulfilling a need.
Yeah.
And that sense for you to fulfill a need is that spiritual responsibility.
And my favorite illustration of this biblically is that of David and Goliath. Okay. David shows up to the battlefield, and of course his brothers hassle him because they're the big brothers. And in that exchange, David starts to hear the taunts of Goliath. And he starts to hear the insults, and in an instant, he became aware of a spiritual need that before he was not aware of. He wasn't aware that there was this threat, that there was this challenge. But the moment he became aware of it, I think the Bible says that he kind of went man to man, like went down the lines and uttered his famous phrase, "Is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? Is there not something that needs to be done here?" And tried to rally people to it. So before it was even like, I'm going to go down there, it was like, somebody should go down there. And so his awareness of the need, represented by Goliath, became pretty quickly a burden, where he realized somebody should do something, but then in the absence of anybody else doing something, pretty quickly became, you know what? I think I could do something. I'm here. God has helped me achieve victory in my life. I've killed a lion, killed a bear, and some of his past spiritual experiences made him feel for whatever reason, qualified to take on Goliath, even though, most people around probably thought he wasn't qualified for it.
Yeah.
But by faith stepped up to the challenge. And so I love that kind of connection there between where awareness of a need becomes a personal burden, a personal responsibility. We feel like I may be qualified, or at least God could use me to meet this specific challenge, this specific need that I become aware of. And I think it's a beautiful illustration for church planting because you don't have to look far to hear the Goliaths in our society that are defying God and, people saying things like the church is dead and churches can't grow in this city, or church planters have tried there and failed. And we got to take those things personally a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And say, no, I serve a living God who can do anything. And then feel some level of, through calling and equipping and training, some level of qualification.
Yeah.
My past has prepared me to meet this challenge.
Yeah, that's awesome. When I've been navigating God's call for me in Detroit, there's several factors that came in and came for God to call me into the city, but there was that sense of spiritual responsibility where, specifically what I talked about before, there being multiple churches there that aren't rooted fundamentally in preaching the gospel and being faithful in that way, and especially discipling people so that they may grow in their faith in Jesus Christ. And I saw the churches there, and so many churches in Detroit, they're there to bring people in and support their churches financially and just stay there. Just
exploitation.
Yeah, exploitation.
Spiritually and financially.
Yeah. And exactly, yeah, spiritually and financially, just to sustain themselves as an organization. And seeing that, I've seen the ways that God has worked in my heart in the past about me wanting to see a church that really is out for the people and to grow the people spiritually. And so just as you're saying, past preparation for the passion that God has in my heart fit right into the city that God had prepared me to plant a church in.
Yeah, and it's a cool thing because it's not necessarily like I'm qualified or like I'm the one that is like the church planters have to avoid that mentality of like I'm the answer to all the city's problems, or the city's just been waiting for me to show up. There has to be a humility because you want to find a challenge that's bigger than yourself, something that is beyond you, that makes you feel small, that just requires you to say, Lord, I don't know, but I'm willing if you'll go with me, if you'll fight for me. Yeah. I believe you can, not necessarily I can. That's how we ought to approach this, with just a great humility. And I would say one of the great sources that we ought to be looking for in finding where to plant churches is existing pastors. I have found that to be the richest and most accurate source of location, because pastors have a unique sense of just knowing their community. They know where people are coming from. They know where other churches are at. And you ask almost any pastor, hey, where do you think another church should be planted? I've never had a pastor say, I don't know. They're all like, well, they all have an idea. Like, I thought about this place or this place. And it's kind of just a sense that they have, even if it's not their personal calling to go plant that church, they do have that sense. And I say, if you're looking for a place, start talking to pastors, get into a local church, start serving, start preparing, find a church that has a church planting heart, a church that wants to send out a church planter, and then start looking at the regions around existing. And I would say practically, you don't need to rush into church planting. It's a right burden and a right call, and we can get a sense of urgency when it comes to church planting. Yeah. When you do see like, oh, there's so much need. People are falling away from God, and churches are closing, and all of those things. But it's still something that requires some preparation. And so even if you have this burden, you're a young person, go to Bible college, talk to your pastor, get his recommendations, get the training that you need, start serving in ministry right now. And just the Lord will prepare you, and the Lord has complete ability to put you in the right place and point you to a city with a need right at the right time, and you'll know. There is an awareness that you'll have that all right, this is the Lord.
Yeah, that's because that's my experience as well. I got introduced to Detroit through you. I came in here Dearborn, not thinking about Detroit, not aware of Detroit. I just came here just by God's leading. And then you introduced me to Detroit and just said, hey, just pray about this, think about it. And I really do appreciate your angle as you counseled me. And this maybe a pastor who has a church planner sending out may hear this as well. I really appreciated the way that you told me, like, hey, this is something I'm praying about, but you examine your God's will for you between you and God, and you figure this thing out. And then just as you're saying with not rushing things, not the ramming into it, because this is God's calling for our lives. This is God's calling, redirecting. Like I have to move my family to this direction. I can't just I can't just go through it willy nilly. I can't just go into it not thinking about it. And there's the tension. There's a tension between there's that need, and God wants us to have initiative and take the wheel and really do it. But there's also, you hold that tension along with, well, we're going to do this God's way. And we're going to be patient and wait on the Lord for how he leads. And I think that's what anyone who's seeking God's will has to navigate, that tension there.
I think one of the signs that you can look for in the sense of like, hey, is this the place? Is this sure? Is when, because I hope that as you're looking around at the world, like you can develop that burden everywhere. I mean, I can't listen to a missionary presentation without thinking like, wow, Lord, like, that country needs the gospel. Send people to, South America, send people to Africa, send people to these places. And you can have a burden for a whole lot of different places without necessarily feeling that, well, is it my responsibility? And so I saw, maybe lack of somebody going there is one thing that might prod you to go. But there's also a reality of some personal suitability or proximity to a place. It would, is this a place that you have some access to practically? Is this a place that you have some rootedness in? Or is this a place that you feel through your life experience, your background, how you were raised, your education? There could be all kinds of factors that say, hey, this is a place where I could live and I could thrive and I could minister and I can reach the people here in some ways. So there's some personal suitability, but and one of the things I was excited with you was when you start to see burden turn into vision. Another word we use a lot in church planting and church ministry is vision. But vision is the ability to, by faith, see something that doesn't exist. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things unseen. And so once your burden starts to become vision, in other words, you can start to see a church where there is no church.
Yeah.
And you can start to see yourself ministering in that position. And then, just the burden for a church starts to turn into a church name. And like, oh, we could meet here. And like, wow, when we do meet, I'd like to sing this song, or I would like to preach through this book of the Bible. And it starts to really get practical, and you can almost see it before it happens. And that's the exciting part of church planting. And I'm excited when we get to it to kind of talk about some of that vision planning. But
for sure.
Once that takes on it, and even with you, once I kind of see you working on a logo and flyers and stuff, I could tell like, all right, it's something that is taken some root, and he has some personal vision for it. Starting to see the work before it's there. I'm the kind, my personality is naturally, I maybe not perhaps personality, maybe the way I'm comfortable in serving is I like to support. I like to support a pastor. I like to contribute to pastor. And that's what I've been doing here in Dearborn for the time being, before, seeing God's call. But there's something different that comes from when God puts something in your heart, a burden, a spiritual responsibility. And, you didn't have to be over my shoulder saying, hey, make a logo here, and hey, do this, hey, write this out. There's something in me that was compelling me,
and drawing me to this thing that is this church.
Yeah.
And even though, like I said, even though I'm most comfortable with, serving and contributing to someone else's vision, the Spirit got me on something.
Yeah.
The Spirit tugged my heart on something.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And we're going to be coming up here. We're going to be at the National Church Planting Conference at Heartland Baptist Bible College.
Yep.
And if you're considering church planting, I would say that's a good place to start, because I started attending that conference early when I just kind of had the burden and thinking like I had, I even had the city on my mind, but I hadn't fully even committed to it the first time that I went to that conference. But the conference basically consists of some great preaching, but then also a lot of missionary presentations of men getting up and explaining this process and how it happened in their life. So, this is who I am. This is my testimony. And then this is the place that the Lord's called us. This is the need. And wow, seeing some of that really inspired me. Seeing other men willing to step up to big challenges really inspired me to just commit. And so I'm blessed to have been able to go back and present at the same conference, the Calling for Dearborn, and have really been blessed by the conference. But I'm looking forward to going back again, and I just love hearing men share their calling, share their vision, share their burden, all of that. And it still inspires me. And so I hope, if anything, through this podcast, if we can help inspire that in you, to start looking at the world around you like you haven't looked at it before. Start praying, and as you go to cities, start asking the question, where's the church here? Who's reaching these people?
Yeah.
I remember, being in that mode, even when I'm on vacation. I'm looking at, there's a church there. I wonder if that's open. And,
I've been getting that too. Yeah. Whenever we go to somewhere else, I'm looking, there's a church there. What kind of church is that?
Yeah. And start looking, because again, I believe that is the process by which God calls men to places. You got to start looking, and you got to get your eyes on it. And you got to start doing the work of recon, which is what I believe our next topic that we'll talk about in our next episode. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to the upcoming episodes we have here. And yeah, there's a good place to stop so we can postpone the conversation from here. But I'm really excited for our podcast. I'm really excited for this series, Church Planners Toolbox Podcast. And I'm excited for it. And I think it's unique where we get to walk through as I'm planning Detroit Baptist Church. It's going to be unique. You'll see me develop. You'll see me develop through this, and even see me learn some things through this, I'm sure.
We're making this up as we go.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say I got to give the shout out here. The name for the podcast, Church Planners Toolbox, is inspired by the book that my father has written, The Church Planners Toolbox, by Doug Levesque. I kind of grew up in this environment in church planting. My dad planted a church when I was 2 years old. And so some of my earliest memories are of that church growing, being in our house, and then moving to its first building, and just kind of got to grow up in that environment. And my dad's written a great book on kind of his experience and process, talks about a bunch of different areas of ministry. We'll definitely talk about the book and share some insights from it, and maybe even do a full review at some point.
Sure.
But you can get it on Amazon, Church Planners Toolbox by Doug Levesque, and we'll be promoting that as much as we can, as well as some other good resources and books that we come across, things that have been helpful to me in church planting as well. And looking forward again to getting other church planters on.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have questions, you want to be on the podcast, you have a suggestion for somebody we should have on?
Yeah, absolutely.
We'd love to hear it. We just want to spread the word and hopefully encourage everybody to be a part of some church planting work.
Awesome. We'll see you guys next time. Keep in tune. And thank you again for joining us on the Church Planners Toolbox.